I never imagined a simple text on a Tuesday morning could make my stomach twist like this. It came through just as I was pouring myself a second cup of coffee, the cheap ceramic mug warm in my hands. I remember how steam curled up, caught the light from my kitchen window. For one quiet second, everything still felt normal. Then my phone buzzed. "Hey Mom. Cass thinks maybe the lake trip should just be us this year. Hope you understand." That was it. No little heart emoji like Alex sometimes added. Not even a smiley face to soften the edge. Just those flat words blinking up at me from the screen, cool and matter-of-fact. My hands tightened around the mug until I thought it might crack. Cass. Always Cass. It's funny how 3 words from her could feel colder than any Vermont winter I've lived through. I sat down at my small kitchen table, the one with the faded sunflower placemats, trying to catch my breath. Outside, a delivery truck rattled past on Maplewood Lane, the driver probably humming along to some mindless pop song. The world was still spinning, perfectly oblivious. Only my world had stopped. You ever get news like that? So sharp and sudden it's almost physical, like someone pressed a thumb into your chest and wouldn't let go? I used to think only big betrayals could shatter you. Affairs, lies, cruel words screamed in anger. Turns out, it can also be just one short text, carefully polite. That's all it takes. My son Alex sent that message. The same Alex I raised mostly alone after my husband died, back when we lived in a cramped duplex and all he wanted was to build little forts out of couch cushions. Now he was 32, married to Cassie, with a freshly painted house near the lake, bought entirely by me. My retirement fund, my security blanket, drained so he could start his new chapter. And apparently, that chapter didn't include me. I read the message again, searching for any sign of guilt or hesitation. There was none. Then I did something I'm almost ashamed to admit. I checked for typos, as if hoping there'd been some mistake. Maybe he meant something else? Maybe he typed too quickly? But the words stayed the same, solid and deliberate on that bright little screen. Cass thinks. Cass decides. Cass says who gets to be family on their lakeside holiday. Not me, apparently. My heart started beating harder. I could hear it in my ears, a dull frantic drum. My thumb hovered over the reply box. What could I possibly say? Beg to come along? Laugh it off like it was nothing? Or unleash every bitter thought boiling up inside me? In the end, I only typed one word. Okay. Just 4 letters. I pressed send. The phone chimed cheerfully, completely unaware that it had just carried off a tiny piece of me. I sat there staring at the table. The sunlight fell across a half-finished crossword, my reading glasses, a tiny chip in the wood that I'd meant to sand down. All of it painfully ordinary. Yet the ordinary felt like a trick now. Because under it, a deep wrongness pulsed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march over to their house, pound on that pretty teal door I'd paid for, and demand to know why. But instead I sat there. Silent. A soft little laugh escaped me. Not because anything was funny. It was that laugh you let out when the only other option is to sob. So I thought to myself, was I ever really family to them? Or just the lady who paid the bills, brought over homemade pot pie on Sundays, babysat their schnauzer when they wanted a weekend away? You ever wonder if love is just a transaction waiting to be exposed? Because right then, in my quiet kitchen, it sure felt like it. Then the phone buzzed again. I jumped like I'd touched a hot stove. It was Cassie this time. Of course. Her words were perfectly sweet on the surface. Hope you understand, Nora. It's really simpler for everyone this way. Simpler. God, that word sliced right through me. Simpler once they'd wrung every last dollar and favor out of me. Simpler now that they had the house, the new appliances, the fancy garden Cassie insisted on, all underwritten by me. I set my phone face down. My hands were trembling, but not from shock anymore. A different kind of tremble. Cold. Controlled. Something inside me shifted right then. Just a fraction. A breath held too long finally let out. They thought I would stay quiet forever. They might be right. Or maybe this was the first crack in that old silence. I don't know if you've ever reached that moment. The one where you realize people you love might love you back, but only on their terms. If you've been there, drop me a word. Even just, same. Because I think sometimes the loneliest pain is feeling like you're the only fool in the world who didn't see it coming. I didn't cry that morning. Not yet. But a storm was gathering somewhere deep in my chest. And I had a feeling it wouldn't be quiet for long. When Alex and Cassie first got engaged, I remember how bright the world seemed. It was early May, the lilacs outside my window bursting open, spilling sweetness into every breeze that drifted through my little kitchen. Cassie stood there by the stove, her auburn hair tied up in a messy knot, holding Alex's hand so tight her knuckles turned pale. I still see that afternoon as if it's happening now. Alex kept running his free hand through his hair, that nervous habit he's had since he was a boy, back when he'd come home from school clutching torn homework and hoping I wouldn't be mad. Now he was 27, brimming with plans. He was building a life with someone who laughed easily, who wore floral skirts and liked to bake scones on rainy days. I wanted that life for him. For both of them. Maybe that's why when Cassie bit her lip and shyly asked if I thought buying a house right off the bat was too risky, I didn't hesitate. I said of course not. I'd help. Because that's what mothers do. Isn't it? Looking back, I'm not sure I ever really gave myself the chance to weigh it all. The numbers, the long-term what-ifs. All I saw was my son's eyes light up. All I heard was Cassie's breathless giggle when Alex squeezed her shoulder. Who thinks about future regret when happiness is glowing right in front of them? It was a modest craftsman-style place near Maplewood Lake. A white porch railing, a sloping yard dotted with wild asters and tiny purple clover. Cassie fell in love instantly. She clutched my arm the first time we toured it together and whispered, "Nora, can't you just see it? Coffee on the steps in the mornings, maybe a swing here someday." And of course, I could see it. So clear it hurt. I took money out of the account Richard and I once set aside for traveling in retirement. He's been gone nearly a decade now, and the idea of touring vineyards or staying at little inns along the coast without him had already lost its shine. So why not give it to Alex instead? Why not turn our dream into his security? The papers were signed in early summer. We stood on that porch together, sun slanting through the trees, the realtor snapping photos on her phone. Cassie turned to me afterward, her eyes wet, her hands cold from excitement. She said, "Nora, you didn't have to do this. We'll never be able to thank you enough." Then she hugged me so fiercely it made my ribs ache. I believed her. Of course I did. Because when you love someone, you believe what they tell you. Don't you? The first few months were golden. I'd stop by with pans of baked ziti or homemade peach crumble. Cassie would wave me inside, her voice sing-song bright, sometimes flour dusting her nose. Alex would be fiddling with the sprinkler in the backyard or assembling a grill he never quite managed to level properly. It all felt so simple then. Easy. One afternoon that fall, I found myself repainting their upstairs hallway. Cassie wanted a color called Misty Pearl. She said it made the space look softer, calmer. Alex was tied up with a work project and Cassie had been fighting off a sinus infection, so I offered. I stood on a ladder for hours, shoulders burning, hair pulled back in a hasty bun, little flecks of gray-white spattering my arms. I hummed old songs Richard used to play on Saturday mornings. When I finished, I sent Cassie a photo. She replied with a string of heart emojis and said she couldn't wait to see it in person. I sat down right there on the top stair, paintbrush still in hand, and felt this swelling pride that maybe, just maybe, I'd done something right. It's strange. The things you give without counting. The countless hours fixing a squeaky gate. The checks quietly written to cover their leftover student loans. Even canceling a trip to Charleston with Ruth last year because Cassie needed someone to watch their schnauzer while they flew to California for a wedding. I didn't mind. At least, I told myself I didn't. Isn't that what love looks like? Filling in gaps so they never have to worry? But lately, I've started to wonder. Maybe by always stepping in, always paying, always smoothing out the rough edges, I accidentally taught them something else. Maybe I taught them my love was a resource that could never run dry. I look back on those early days and still feel warmth. I do. How could I not? Cassie's laughter drifting out their kitchen window, the smell of cinnamon rolls wafting down the porch, Alex beaming as he carried in new patio furniture I helped buy. These were good moments. Real. But here's the trouble. Memories like that, they glow so bright it's hard to see the shadows gathering around them. I think a part of me always hoped that by giving so much, I was weaving myself deeper into their lives. That every meal dropped off, every bill quietly covered, every room painted was like tying another knot that said we're family. We're unbreakable. Funny how you can give your whole heart, your whole wallet, your whole tired body to building something for people. And still end up standing outside, peeking through the windows, wondering if you were ever truly inside at all. I didn't see it then. How could I? But that's the thing about stories like mine. The hurt doesn't start big. It starts right here. In all the small, beautiful sacrifices you'd swear were love. And maybe they were. But maybe they were also the first threads unraveling. I think I started shrinking myself long before I realized it. It's a quiet habit. You do it without fanfare. One small compromise here, another swallowed opinion there, until eventually you're living on the edges of your own life. It began in the gentlest ways. Cassie once told me she hated the sight of dead leaves cluttering the front walk. Said it made the place look unkempt, like no one really cared about it. So that fall, I started dropping by with a rake every other afternoon. Even when my knees ached. Even when the wind cut through my old wool coat. I told myself it was nothing. Just being helpful. Who was I, if not someone useful? Then there was the matter of the squeaky back gate. Alex could have fixed it in under an hour, but he was always caught up with coding contracts and Cassie spent her weekends running custom cake orders at her bakery. So I did it. Bought a tiny can of graphite spray from the hardware store in town. Sat out there on a rickety stool, wearing my gardening gloves, fiddling with the latch until it moved smooth and silent. Cassie's eyes actually sparkled when she noticed. Oh, thank God, Nora. That thing was driving me nuts. She squeezed my arm, smiling so brightly I could have mistaken it for gratitude. Maybe it was. For that minute. Funny how the memory of that small squeeze used to warm me. Now it mostly stings. It went on like this. I canceled plans with Ruth more times than I can count. Ruth would raise an eyebrow, her silver earrings catching the cafe lights, and say, "You sure about skipping the trip to Montreal?" I'd laugh it off. Oh, it's just easier. Cassie's anxious about leaving Winston alone for long stretches. Winston was their scruffy little schnauzer with a fondness for barking at passing bicycles. And yes, he was sweet. But was he worth erasing my own joys over and over? Looking back, I'm not sure why I felt their convenience mattered more than my life. It's unsettling, how naturally it all came. I think it's because being needed felt a lot like being loved. You ever get that confused? Because I did. For years. I took over paying off the lingering student loans Alex still carried. Quietly mailed the final checks, didn't even tell him until months later. He just hugged me, almost absently, already reaching for his phone to check work emails. Cassie said, "Oh wow, that's a weight off our shoulders." Then she laughed, bright and airy, and pivoted to talking about how she was thinking of redecorating the guest room in sage green. Like it was nothing. Like it was all expected. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd just paused then. If I'd asked them straight out, "Do you see me? Really see me, beyond the help I give?" But I didn't. I smiled. Said sage green would look lovely. Because that's who I was. The mother who made things easier. Quieter. Cleaner. Last winter, Cassie caught a nasty bout of the flu right around the holidays. She called me one afternoon, voice small and tired, said Alex was slammed with deadlines, she couldn't keep up with the errands. So I showed up with 2 bags of groceries, a carton of lemon sorbet for her throat, a pot of homemade chicken stew still steaming. I cleaned their bathroom, scrubbed down the counters, ran a load of laundry. Cassie sat curled on the couch under a fleece blanket, thanking me in that thin breathy voice. It should have felt good. Instead, I drove home that night on snow-dusted roads, headlights making long lonely streaks across empty fields, and for the first time I wondered if they'd ever do the same for me. Would they rush to my door if I called? Bring me ginger ale and fold my towels just right? Or would they find a way to politely stay away? That question sank into my ribs and stayed there. I don't think I ever meant to erase myself. It just seemed simpler to be agreeable. To keep showing up with the rake, the soup, the checkbook, my open arms. Because the alternative was what? Risk their discomfort? Risk them thinking I was a burden instead of a blessing? The saddest part is, I told myself all these little sacrifices were proof of my love. Proof I was a good mother. A good mother doesn't count favors. A good mother just gives. But now, in the calm after so many storms, I've started to see it differently. Maybe love isn't always about giving without question. Maybe it's also about letting people meet you halfway. About standing your ground enough that they have to take a few steps toward you too. You ever feel like you taught someone exactly how to take advantage of you? Because I think that's what I did. Without ever meaning to, I showed them where my lines were, nowhere. I made myself small so they could spread out. I dimmed so they could shine. And in doing so, I think I slowly disappeared from their eyes as a person at all. The last time I dropped off groceries, Cassie hardly even glanced at the bags. Just called out from the dining room, "Oh, could you leave those on the counter, Nora? We're in the middle of picking tiles for the bathroom reno." I stood there in my quilted vest, hands still stiff from the cold, and realized she didn't even get up. Didn't even smile. I was just a delivery person. An errand. Background. That was the moment something tiny cracked inside me. So faint, I almost missed it. But it was there. A shift. And it wouldn't be the last. My phone buzzed again later that evening. I was standing by the stove, stirring a small pot of mushroom soup, the kind Ruth always teased me for making too often. Outside, the street lamp cast a gentle circle of gold across the driveway, catching on the frost that was already creeping in. I reached for the phone with damp hands, wiping them quickly on the hem of my sweatshirt. A new message waited, this time from Cassie. "Hope you understand, Nora. It's just simpler for everyone this way." I read it twice. Then a third time, even slower. Trying to see if maybe my eyes were tricking me. But the words didn't change. They just settled deeper, like small stones in my gut. I set the phone down on the counter, a little harder than I meant to. It wobbled, then lay still, screen glowing up at the ceiling. Cassie had always been polite, sweet even, in that breezy effortless way. She'd tilt her head, smile wide, laugh at almost everything Alex said, as if the world was a place built just to entertain her. It was easy to forget how cold courtesy can be. How much it hides. Simpler. That was her word. As if slicing me out of their plans, of their joy, was like rearranging furniture. Not cruel. Just practical. I stood there for a long time, spoon still in my hand, soup slowly starting to bubble over. The smell of mushrooms and thyme should have been comforting. It made me nauseous. You ever have a moment like that? Where the person you've bent over backwards for, the one whose birthdays you've baked 3-tier cakes for, whose sick days you've stalked with ginger ale and magazines, sends you a line so casual, so neat, that you realize they've never truly seen you at all? I turned off the stove. Moved the pot to a cool burner. Sat down at the small table by the window, the same spot where Alex used to do his algebra homework, brow furrowed, pencil tapping against his lip. I'd give anything for that time back. Those afternoons that felt busy and tender and safe. Because right then, staring at Cassie's message, I felt exposed. As if some truth I'd been too blind to spot was finally stepping into the light. Simpler. Of course it was simpler for them. Simpler now that the house was fully theirs, the loan-free deed tucked safely in their drawer. Simpler now that I'd already paid off lingering debts, written checks big enough to wipe away mistakes. Simpler because they'd wrung every possible bit of support and comfort from me, and could now tidy me out of sight. I caught my reflection in the dark window. Hair pulled back in a messy clip, little silver strands winking at my temples. Eyes tired. Not sad exactly. Just stripped. What stung most was how I hadn't seen it coming. Or maybe I had. Maybe deep down, I'd always known it was heading here. But I'd kept hoping for something softer. Because that's what mothers do. Isn't it? Cassie never said the word excluded. She didn't have to. Her text was clean, brisk, carefully punctuated. She hoped I understood. Well, I did. Or at least I was starting to. I thought of the afternoon last spring when Cassie and I sat together on her back porch, drinking sweet iced tea. She leaned her head on my shoulder for a second, sighed, said, "You're like a second mom to me, Nora." I remember how my heart practically bloomed at that. How I went home glowing, telling Ruth over the phone that I felt lucky, so very lucky, to have a daughter-in-law who cared. But what is caring, really, if it disappears the moment it's inconvenient? If it has an off switch, easily flicked when plans would be simpler without you? I rubbed my forehead, trying to smooth out the ache building there. Tried to shake off how much smaller I suddenly felt in my own kitchen. My own house. Isn't that something? You pour yourself into others so completely that one clipped sentence can make even your familiar walls seem foreign. A car rolled by outside, headlights flaring across my living room. For a heartbeat, I almost expected it to be Alex. Pulling in, coming up the walk, knocking at the door just to say, "Mom, don't mind Cassie. Of course you're coming with us. Of course you're family." But no car stopped. No footsteps crunched up my path. The darkness folded in again, undisturbed. I picked up my phone once more. Looked at Cassie's words. Read them like a contract I hadn't realized I'd signed. "Hope you understand." I did understand. Maybe more than she ever intended. That was when a strange calm settled over me. Not comfort. Not forgiveness. Just a quiet, icy kind of recognition. Like something inside me had been holding its breath for years, and was finally exhaling. It wouldn't be the last breath I took that way. Not by a long shot. It was Ruth who finally said the thing I'd been too afraid to voice. She came by the next morning, a basket of blueberry muffins balanced on her hip, her thick gray scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Vermont was still clawing at spring, the air biting through even heavy jackets. She didn't waste time on small talk. One look at my face and she knew. Ruth always had that gift. She set the basket on my table, pushed aside the local paper, and wrapped her hands around her coffee mug like she needed the warmth to brace herself. "Nora, when's the last time you checked your accounts?" Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. I tried to laugh it off. "What do you mean?" "Cassie handles most of that stuff online. Makes it easier come tax time." I heard how flimsy it sounded the moment it left my mouth. Ruth didn't smile. "That's exactly what worries me." She leaned in closer, her perfume a soft mix of sandalwood and citrus. "You trust them completely, don't you?" I opened my mouth. Closed it again. The truth stuck in my throat. Because yes. Of course I trusted them. Why wouldn't I? They were family. My only family left. Isn't that supposed to count for something? She didn't wait for me to answer. Boots scraping on the tile, Ruth marched over to my little desk in the corner. Opened my old laptop, the one with a tiny crack in the corner of the screen from where I dropped it 2 years ago. Come on. Sit. Let's just look. Just to be sure. I shuffled over, feeling foolish and exposed, like a teenager getting caught in some secret. My hands trembled so badly on the keyboard that Ruth finally reached over and typed in the password for me. My wedding date. I winced seeing it there in the field, a ghost of my old hopes. The screen loaded up my bank's homepage. It looked normal. Familiar little green logo in the corner, the same gentle slogan about building dreams together. I almost felt relief. See? It's all fine. But Ruth wasn't satisfied. Click into the transaction history. So I did. Line after line popped up. Some grocery runs, the electric bill, a few donations to the local animal shelter. All things I remembered. I let out a shaky breath. But Ruth's eyes narrowed. Scroll further. Try last year. So I did. And that's when the breath left me for real. Dozens of withdrawals. Small enough that individually, I probably wouldn't have blinked. 200 here labeled as home maintenance. 150 there tagged urgent appliance repair. But stacked together, month after month, it turned into thousands. I clicked on a subtab showing linked accounts. My chest tightened. Cassie's name appeared next to a secondary card. Authorized to draw straight from my checking. The room felt suddenly too bright. I squinted, like the sun had come inside just to glare at me. Ruth laid a hand on my shoulder. Her palm was steady, grounding. But her voice was low. They've been using you, Nora. For a long time. I shook my head. No. Cassie probably just set that up for shared bills. They've been busy. It's easier. My excuses tumbled out, hollow and thin. The words of a woman desperate not to admit she'd been naive. Ruth squeezed a little harder. Easier for who? She whispered. That question sat there between us. Heavy. I couldn't look away from it. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. I scrolled back further. Past last Christmas, past the new year. Found a $900 transfer marked property taxes. Only I knew I'd paid those directly, by check, weeks before that. A low sound scraped out of my throat. Some sad little laugh that tried to be a sigh and failed. You ever trust someone so completely that seeing proof of their betrayal doesn't even feel real at first? Like your brain just refuses to accept it, because if you do, everything you built together starts to rot all at once. I clicked deeper. More charges. A payment to a landscaper I'd never hired. A boutique kitchen shop in Burlington. I pictured Cassie browsing polished copper pots, tapping my card without a flicker of guilt. Suddenly my kitchen felt foreign. The gentle ticking clock on the wall, the smell of lemon oil from the table I'd wiped down that morning, none of it belonged to me anymore. Or maybe I didn't belong to it. Not the way I thought. Ruth pulled her chair closer, voice low. Listen to me. You need to talk to someone. A lawyer, a financial advisor. Before they drain everything. I rubbed my temples. I wanted to argue. To say Alex would never let it go that far. But hadn't he already? Wasn't silence the same as permission? I closed the laptop. My hands didn't just tremble now. They quaked. But not entirely from fear. There was something else creeping in. Colder. Sharper. A realization. My love, all those Sunday dinners, surprise flower pots left on their porch, checks written with only the briefest hesitation, had become a tool they used. Not because they hated me. Maybe because they simply didn't think of me as someone they could hurt. Because who feels bad siphoning from a well they believe will never run dry? I met Ruth's eyes. She nodded once. Serious. Protect yourself, Nora. Before it's too late. A dull roar started in my ears. I pressed a hand to my chest, almost expecting my heart to pound out a protest. But all it did was beat. Steady. Waiting for me to decide what came next. I didn't march into any office, slamming fists or raising my voice. That's not how it happened. It started small. Almost tender. Like testing how cold the water was before deciding if I could stand to dive in. A few days after Ruth sat at my kitchen table and pulled my whole illusion apart, I called Mr. Hayes. He's the financial advisor Richard and I started seeing after our 20th anniversary. A quiet man, careful with his words, always wore those narrow blue ties that made him look half as nervous as he probably felt. Over the years, I'd come to think of him more as a distant relative than a paid expert. Which might have been my first mistake. I dialed his number in the early afternoon. The sun was pouring through my dining room window, pooling across my old oak floor. Dust floated up in lazy little spirals. For a second, I almost hung up. Almost decided it was simpler to keep pretending. But I didn't. His assistant answered. Cheerful, overly bright. She put me on hold. A tinny jazz tune leaked through the receiver, annoying enough to snap me out of my haze. Then his voice came on. Warm. Familiar. Nora, to what do I owe this pleasure? He laughed a little, probably picturing me calling to ask about my holiday fund, or to see if he'd gotten the homemade peanut brittle I'd sent last winter. I swallowed. Felt my throat tighten around words that suddenly weighed more than I thought they would. I just wanted to go over some account details. Routine check, that's all. If he sensed anything off in my tone, he didn't show it. Of course. Always happy to walk through things. Give me just a second. I listened to the soft clack of his keyboard. The way his breath caught when he started scanning. Little details like that matter. You learn to hear the truth in pauses long before it ever lands in spoken sentences. I see a few new scheduled transfers, mostly tied to home updates. Some larger than your usual pattern. Home updates. I nearly laughed. My house hadn't seen so much as a new porch planter in 3 years. Can you tell me who authorized those? My voice came out steady. I surprised myself. Another pause. Then a sigh. Your secondary signatory did. Mrs. Cassie Bishop. He said it so simply, as if reading from a polite script. But every syllable seemed to scrape along my skin. I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course she did. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I'd like you to flag any future transactions for my direct approval. Nothing moves without me from now on. His relief was almost audible. Absolutely. I'll set that up immediately. When I hung up, I let the phone slide from my hand and drop onto the table. It landed with a soft thud, rattling my mug of cold tea. The kitchen felt wrong then. Like someone else's kitchen that I'd wandered into by mistake. The painted rooster clock above the fridge ticked on, oblivious. You ever realize, all in one breath, that the people you love might not just take advantage of your trust, but quietly expect to? I think that's when the tremor inside me started hardening into something else. Not rage. Not quite. Just a clear, almost clinical understanding. I had been naive. I'd dressed it up in prettier words over the years. Generous. Loyal. Devoted. But naive was closer to the bone. I didn't stop there. That same evening, Ruth drove me to see Mr. Leonard. He's a local attorney, office right across from the pharmacy, with thick glasses and a habit of tapping his pen when he gets deep in thought. I'd gone to him once years ago to settle Richard's estate. Now here I was again, sitting across from the same battered walnut desk. Only this time, it wasn't grief that brought me. It was something colder. Mr. Leonard studied my paperwork carefully. Every time he flipped a page, his brow knit a little tighter. Finally he removed his glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose. Nora, I won't sugarcoat it. You've given them quite a bit of access. Durable power of attorney, rights over certain assets. If they wanted to, they could move a lot more. I held my breath. It sounded worse coming from someone else's mouth. I'd spent so long telling myself it was harmless. That I was just making their lives simpler. He leaned forward, his gaze steady. But we can start unwinding this today. It'll take paperwork. Signatures. Patience. And Nora, you have to be absolutely sure. This isn't a small step. I nodded. Felt something deep in my chest settle, almost like bracing for impact. I'm sure. He didn't question me again. Just slid the first stack of forms across the desk. His pen was smooth, black lacquer with a tiny gold band near the tip. Funny the things you notice when everything is quietly unraveling. My hand trembled a little on the first signature. By the third, it didn't. You know, I always thought protecting my family meant opening every door. Covering every bill. Saying yes, over and over, until yes was the only word I knew. Turns out, sometimes protecting your family means protecting yourself from them. Hard truth, isn't it? When I left Leonard's office, Ruth squeezed my shoulder. Proud, sad, protective all at once. We didn't say much on the drive back. The car hummed along the two-lane road, headlights catching bare tree limbs and the tiny sparkle of frost gathering again. I stared out at the dark, thinking how strangely calm I felt. Like I'd just finished the first quiet lap of a long swim, lungs burning but alive. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. But it was the first real step. And there was no turning back. It was Ruth who suggested the private investigator. We were sitting at a corner booth in Willow and Beans, the cafe by the lake that still put tiny sprigs of mint on top of their whipped cream. I stirred my latte, not tasting it. Just watching the foam swirl. The place was nearly empty. A couple in matching fleece jackets shared a cinnamon roll by the window. The radio played an old Billy Joel song low enough it sounded like a hum. Ruth didn't waste time. Nora, I know a guy. Used him when my brother's business partner started cooking the books. He's discreet. He's thorough. I flinched a little. The idea of digging around felt ugly, like admitting everything was already broken. She reached across, laid her hand over mine. Her skin was cool, her silver rings pressing gentle little shapes into my knuckles. You have to know exactly what's been done. Otherwise, how will you protect yourself? I wanted to argue. Tell her this was family, not some petty con. But wasn't that the problem? Wasn't it precisely because they were family that they'd felt so comfortable taking? So I nodded. The investigator's name was Warren. He looked nothing like I'd imagined. Not sleek or shadowy. He showed up on my porch in a navy windbreaker, bald on top, carrying a battered leather folder that smelled faintly of pipe smoke. He introduced himself with a firm handshake, eyes kind behind thin glasses. Thank you for trusting me, Mrs. Bishop. I know this isn't easy. I led him inside, feeling strangely embarrassed by the pile of folded laundry still on my couch. We sat at my kitchen table. I poured us coffee, hands shaking so much I nearly sloshed it onto the saucers. I told him everything. About the house I'd bought for Alex and Cassie. The accounts Cassie managed. The transactions Ruth helped me find. He didn't interrupt. Just took careful notes, nodding once in a while. When I finally ran out of words, Warren closed his notebook. I'll look into this quietly. No one will know it's happening. I'll be in touch. And just like that, the first real line was drawn. Not by Cassie. Not by Alex. But by me. The days that followed stretched out long and fragile. I tried to keep busy. Reorganized my pantry. Cleaned out the hall closet, found Richard's old fishing hat still smelling faintly of lake water. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch in the afternoon sun, mug warming my palms, and wonder how many little signs I'd overlooked. You ever do that? Replay everything, hunting for clues that were probably glaring all along? One morning, my phone rang. It was Warren. Mrs. Bishop, I have some preliminary findings. I'd like to bring them over if that's all right. All right. A tiny word for something that might crack my whole life open. He arrived within the hour. Sat down at the same table, laid out a neat stack of printed statements, highlighted in soft neon colors. His pen tapped gently on the first page. They've leveraged your property, Nora. It appears Cassie initiated paperwork to use the house as collateral for a second mortgage. Significant amount. Filed just last week. My breath stuttered. I reached for the edge of the table, gripping it until the wood bit into my palm. Collateral. On the house I bought outright. The house I gifted them so they wouldn't have to start married life under a mountain of debt. Warren kept his voice calm. It's positioned as a standard family-backed transaction. No mention of your involvement beyond the original deed transfer. If you hadn't begun the reversal process, they'd be free to borrow against it without you ever knowing. My chest burned. I couldn't tell if it was grief or rage. Maybe it didn't matter. Both left me hollow. He flipped to another page. Multiple small fund reallocations, all under household maintenance or improvement labels. But the destinations trace back to accounts tied to Cassie's maiden name. Personal investments, not joint assets. I swallowed hard. The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly, the fridge humming too loud, too bright. Warren paused. I don't like speculating beyond facts, but patterns like this typically mean someone's positioning for long-term separation of assets. Keeping certain funds clear of shared liability. Long-term. That sounded so cold. So planned. I sat back, pressing a hand over my eyes. Cassie had been so friendly, so quick to hug, to lean her head on my shoulder at barbecues. And all along she'd been building herself an exit plan. One that left me footing bills for a life I was no longer welcome in. Warren packed up his papers gently. I'll keep gathering documentation. For now, I recommend saying nothing. The more they stay unaware, the easier it will be to secure your protections. I nodded. Silent. He left me with a small card, his number handwritten twice on the back. Just in case. When the door clicked shut behind him, I stood in my quiet house, feeling everything rearrange inside me. You know, I used to believe being silent was a kind of grace. That if you didn't rock the boat, people would appreciate your calm, your willingness to bend. But looking at those neat stacks of evidence on my table, I started to realize something much darker. Silence doesn't earn you kindness. It just teaches people how far they can go without consequence. That was the moment a new resolve settled into my bones. Not loud. Not explosive. But solid. Ready. Because now I had the truth. And that was more powerful than any apology I'd been longing for. The folder sat there on Mr. Leonard's desk. Thick. Slightly curled at the edges. A simple manila cover that somehow felt heavier than bricks. I sat across from him, fingers twisting the small silver ring on my thumb. A nervous habit. Richard used to tease me about it. Said it made me look like a kid trying to hide a secret. Mr. Leonard adjusted his glasses, pushed the folder a few inches closer. His office was quiet except for the faint whir of a little fan on the windowsill. Outside, I could see Main Street in its slow afternoon shuffle. A woman walked by with a bouquet of sunflowers. Someone else balanced 2 paper bags full of groceries. Ordinary life. Blissfully unaware of how close it could teeter to collapse. Leonard cleared his throat. Nora, everything we've discussed is here. The reversal of the property deed, the freezes on your joint accounts, the immediate halt to Cassie's power of attorney privileges. Once you sign, it sets off a series of filings. It can't be undone without significant legal battles. His words were calm, practiced. But underneath, I heard the warning. This was big. This would change everything. I nodded. Because of course it would. That was the point. Funny, isn't it? How we spend our lives trying to build something that feels unshakable. A family, a future. Then one day, you're sitting in a lawyer's office deciding how to carefully dismantle it. Not out of hate. Out of a raw need to survive. I reached for the pen he laid out. It was a simple ballpoint. Nothing fancy. But my hand hovered there, just for a breath. A tiny moment of grief for what I once thought we all were. Then I picked it up. My signature scratched across the first page. Then the second. By the fourth, my hand steadied. My pulse even slowed. I thought I'd feel guilt. Some twisted sense of betrayal. Isn't that what mothers are wired for? To keep forgiving, keep opening the door, keep hoping the next chapter might be softer? But sitting there, watching Leonard organize each freshly signed page into neat stacks, I felt something else entirely. Relief. A clean, quiet release. Like finally putting down a burden I'd been too stubborn to admit was breaking me. Leonard tapped the last sheet twice, aligning it with gentle precision. You've just protected yourself in more ways than you know, Nora. His voice softened. I wish more people your age were this proactive. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd. Proactive. Like I was calmly planning a garden or reorganizing my pantry. Not blowing up the very foundation of my family to keep from drowning. I leaned back in the leather chair, breathing in the faint scent of lemon polish and old paper. It reminded me of the library Richard used to drag me to on Saturday mornings, hoping I'd learn to love history books half as much as he did. A tiny ache sparked behind my ribs. If he were here, would we have ever reached this point? Or would his steadiness have caught these cracks before they spread so wide? I shook the thought off. It was pointless. The past can't walk back through that door, no matter how much you ache for it. Leonard pushed a small stack of copies toward me, neatly clipped. These are yours. Keep them somewhere secure. If anything escalates, and I suspect it will, we'll have this entire paper trail ready. I gathered them up carefully. The weight of them surprised me. It wasn't just paper. It was proof. Proof I hadn't imagined all the small betrayals. Proof that I wasn't crazy or overdramatic or too sensitive, the way I'd sometimes wondered at night staring up at my bedroom ceiling. We stood, the old wooden floor creaking under us. Leonard gave my hand a gentle squeeze. His eyes looked tired, but kind. Please call me for anything, Nora. Day or night. I mean that. I nodded, my throat tight. Managed a small, grateful smile. By the time I stepped outside, the afternoon sun had shifted. The street felt different. Brighter somehow. Or maybe I was the one who'd changed. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long minute, folder pressed to my chest, feeling the breeze tug at my hair. A little girl skipped past with her father, clutching a melting ice cream cone. She laughed, shrill and free. I watched them turn the corner and disappear. You ever wish you could step back into a simpler version of yourself? The one who still believed people's promises were solid. That love was enough of a safeguard against harm. I used to be her. I almost miss her. Then I felt the folder's edge dig into my ribs. Sharp. Real. Necessary. This was my line in the sand. Drawn not in anger, but in the sober light of truth. Cassie and Alex would never see it coming. And maybe that was the saddest part. That I even had to do it at all. I turned, started down the block toward my car, each step echoing a little louder than the last. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet promise unfurled. Next time they tried to pull me under, they'd find the ground was gone. Only solid stone where I'd once been soft earth. It was a Wednesday morning when the envelope appeared. I found it on my porch step, tucked under the little iron frog statue that held my spare key. Cassie's handwriting stared up at me from a pale pink sticky note. Just sign when you're ready, Nora. This will make everything easier while we're away. That word again. Easier. As if slicing away my autonomy, my very breath, was a gentle housekeeping task. I stood there on the porch, my robe pulled tight against the chill. The neighbor's dog barked down the street, chasing after a squirrel. Someone's wind chime trilled out a careless little tune. Meanwhile, my whole chest felt hollow. I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than I expected, thick with paperwork. Back inside, I set it down on the kitchen counter beside a bowl of overripe peaches. My hands hovered over it for a long moment. Then I peeled back the flap. Inside were neatly stacked documents. The first few pages were full of bland headers. Updates to your household directive. Standard estate efficiency. It all sounded so harmless. So civilized. But I kept reading. Line after line, paragraphs of dense legal text, until my eyes burned. Buried midway through was the real blade. A permanent, irrevocable power of attorney. Giving Cassie full control over my finances, my property, even my medical decisions. It was right there in black ink. A quiet transfer of everything that still belonged to me. Disguised in careful language, probably expecting my trust to do the rest. I sat down hard at the table. Felt the old wooden chair creak under me. The refrigerator clicked on behind me, its low hum suddenly loud enough to be unnerving. You ever think you're past the point of being shocked? That after enough small betrayals, nothing could surprise you anymore? I thought that. Until I saw how easily Cassie had tried to wipe me away with a signature. They were already on that lake cruise. I pictured them sipping bright cocktails under a striped umbrella. Alex's arm lazily draped around Cassie's shoulder. Cassie wearing those oversized sunglasses, smiling her pretty little smile, probably telling Alex how this was all for the best. For us. I picked up the pen that was lying near my grocery list. My hand hovered. My stomach twisted, almost hopeful. What if I just signed it? Let them handle everything. Stopped fighting. Would that finally earn me back some tiny piece of their affection? The thought made me so sick I nearly laughed. Love shouldn't have to be bought by surrendering your life piece by piece. But that's what they were counting on. On my softness. My history of saying yes. My fear of rocking the boat. I put the pen down. Instead, I carefully tucked every page back into the envelope. Smoothed the flap. Let it sit there on the counter like nothing had happened. If they wanted a game, I'd give them one. Just not the kind they expected. Later that afternoon, I drove to Leonard's office. Carried the envelope into his waiting room where his assistant was rearranging a vase of daffodils. The smell was bright, almost too cheerful. Leonard came out a moment later, motioned me back. He studied the documents in silence, lips pressed together. Finally he looked up. His eyes were different. Not just professional. Protective. Nora, this isn't a simple estate matter. This is predatory. If you'd signed this, they'd have the right to liquidate everything. Your home, your accounts, your healthcare choices. My mouth went dry. But I nodded. Because by then, I knew. Even if my heart still begged for some better explanation. We sat there together drafting a more aggressive set of protections. Reinforcing the reversals. Adding clauses that flagged any future attempts at control. Layer after layer of defense that Cassie and Alex wouldn't see until it was far too late. I watched Leonard's pen glide over form after form. Each stroke another nail in the door they'd hoped to quietly walk through. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like oxygen. Funny, isn't it? How doing the hard thing can make you breathe easier than any pretty lie ever could. When it was all signed, Leonard slid a new folder across to me. A copy of every protection we'd just put in place. His expression softened. Keep this somewhere safe. If they push back, we'll be ready. I slipped it into my bag. The weight of it settled against my hip as I stood. Almost comforting. Walking back to my car, I noticed tiny pink petals scattered across the sidewalk. Someone's flowering tree had started to shed, painting the concrete like confetti. Life went on. People still planted trees that bloomed. Not everything had to be ugly. But sitting there behind my steering wheel, I gripped the folder and whispered to myself. Never again. That was the real turn. Not the paperwork, not Leonard's stern voice. It was that promise. The one that hummed quiet and dangerous in my chest. Never again would they mistake my silence for weakness. Never again would I hand them the pen and let them rewrite my life. And the best part? They didn't even know yet. They were off laughing on a boat, blissfully unaware the ground was shifting under them. Soon enough, they'd feel it. And I wouldn't have to lift a single finger more. By the time Friday rolled around, I could almost hear the click of gears falling into place. It was a soft sound, only in my head maybe, but steady. Certain. Like everything was finally moving the way it should have all along. That morning, I met with Warren again. He showed up at my door in a maroon fleece jacket, cheeks pink from the cold, carrying a slim new folder. We sat at the kitchen table, same spot where I used to roll out cookie dough with Alex when he was small. Back when his hair stuck up in the back no matter how hard I tried to smooth it. Warren flipped open the folder. His pen tapped once, twice on the top page. It's all there, Mrs. Bishop. Every withdrawal, every transfer Cassie made from your accounts. Dates, amounts, destination accounts under her maiden name. We've even matched some to purchases, luxury goods, private investments. Nothing tied to household upkeep. He paused. Looked up at me with eyes that tried to be gentle. I know this isn't easy to see. I didn't say anything. Just kept my hands folded in my lap, thumbs rubbing over each other like trying to erase a stain. He continued. Our financial analysis is thorough enough to stand up in court. But frankly, if it comes to that, they'd have little ground to stand on. Your paperwork with Mr. Leonard is airtight. Their own records condemn them. A part of me thought I'd feel triumphant hearing it. Vindicated, maybe. But all I felt was a tired kind of ache. Like my bones were sighing. You ever pour so much of yourself into people that when they break your trust, it's not anger that hits first. It's exhaustion. Pure and heavy. Because it means all those late-night reassurances you whispered to yourself were lies. Warren closed the folder, slid it gently across to me. I placed my hand over it. It was warm from his touch. Thank you, I said softly. It was all I could manage. He seemed to understand. Nodded once, then let himself out, leaving me alone in my quiet kitchen. I sat there for a long while. Stared at the small dish of lemons on the windowsill. They were starting to wrinkle, their bright yellow skin going soft in patches. Funny how quickly things rot if you're not paying attention. Later that afternoon, I drove back to Leonard's office. Maplewood was busy, people bustling along the sidewalks, holding cardboard trays of coffee, laughing under scarves pulled up to their noses. It felt surreal. Life went on, entirely unbothered by the fact my world was rearranging in secret. Leonard greeted me at the door himself. He wore one of those checkered ties that always seemed slightly crooked. Ushered me inside with a somber smile. We sat in his office again, the same dark-paneled room that smelled faintly of old books and pine cleaner. He laid out the final stack of documents. These will lock down everything, Nora. No more access. No more loopholes. If they try to contest, we have your investigators' full report ready to respond. I nodded. Pressed the pen to the first page. The ink flowed smooth, dark, final. Signature by signature, it was done. No fanfare. No dramatic music. Just my name over and over, drawing a clear border that could no longer be crossed. When we finished, Leonard leaned back, his chair groaning under his weight. His eyes crinkled, almost like he was proud. You've done a brave thing here. Not many people can. I let out a slow breath. Looked down at my hands, faint blue veins tracing up my wrists. I didn't feel brave. I felt stripped bare. But maybe that was close enough. He walked me out to the front steps. The sun was dipping lower, sending long orange streaks across the brick walkway. A few kids zipped past on scooters, their laughter bouncing off the shop windows. I stood there for a second, folder hugged tight to my chest. Leonard gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then went back inside. And there I was. Just me and the late afternoon air. Alone. But oddly steadier than I'd been in months. Back home, I put the folder in my bedroom dresser, right under a stack of old quilted pillowcases. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and closed my eyes. Let myself really feel it. The relief. The grief. All tangled up, impossible to sort. You ever realize in one quiet minute that you're done begging for decency? That's what it was. A gentle, unwavering knowing. When I finally opened my eyes, the room looked the same. But I wasn't. Something deep inside had settled. Not healed, not yet. But resolved. That night, I made myself a small dinner. Just roasted chicken, a few sweet carrots, some buttered rolls. The TV played softly in the background, some travel show highlighting tiny cobblestone streets in Italy. I watched without really seeing. Because all I could think was this. They were out there on that boat somewhere. Laughing, planning, thinking I was still the same old Nora who never said no. They didn't know yet. Didn't feel the ground shifting beneath them. But soon they would. And I wouldn't have to lift a finger. My silence had become its own quiet barricade. And for the first time in years, that silence felt powerful. They pulled into the driveway mid-morning, their SUV rolling to a slow stop like nothing was amiss. I watched from across the street, standing beside Ruth's car. My hands were tucked into the pockets of my cardigan, gripping the soft lining so hard my knuckles ached. Cassie hopped out first, sunglasses perched on her head, hair gathered in a glossy low twist. She wore that loose linen jumpsuit she loved, the one she always said made her feel put together without trying. Alex climbed out slower, still scrolling his phone, only glancing up when Cassie slammed her door. Their laughter floated over to me, careless and bright. Then it died all at once. Cassie froze. Alex squinted, trying to piece it together. There were two unfamiliar cars in the driveway, both with realtor magnets on their doors. The lawn was neatly trimmed but dotted with small signs advertising the open house. Near the porch stood a young couple, arms linked, talking with the agent I'd hired to handle the final sale paperwork. Cassie's face drained of color so quickly it almost startled me. She took a few steps forward, her mouth opening, then closing again. Alex finally looked up from his phone. His brows drew together. Mom? His voice cracked around my name, like he hadn't used it in far too long. I stepped forward. The sidewalk felt oddly solid under my feet, like it was holding me steady. I didn't rush. Didn't flinch. When I reached them, Cassie's eyes were sharp and panicked. What is this? Why are there people in our house? She actually said our. As if those walls still belonged to her. I studied her for a moment. Noted the faint lines of sunburn on her shoulders, the new gold chain around her neck. Vacation souvenirs. She'd spent days floating carefree on a boat, while back home, everything shifted. I spoke calmly. It's not your house anymore. The sale closed 2 days ago. Cassie's mouth fell open, then snapped shut. Her hands flew up in frustration. You can't do that, Nora. We had refinancing in the works. There were contracts. I tilted my head. No, there weren't. At least, none that still stand. Alex finally stepped closer, his phone forgotten at his side. His voice dropped low, almost pleading. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Why all this behind our backs? Something in my chest twinged. Because he still sounded like my boy for that breath of a second. But then I remembered every cold message, every quiet withdrawal. And how easy it had been for him to look away. I held his gaze. Because you both made your choices long before I made mine. Cassie laughed. It wasn't pretty. It was sharp, almost desperate. We were managing things for you. Trying to keep it simple. You're not young anymore. You needed someone to. No. I cut her off. Firm. Quiet. Unshakable. She blinked, stunned that I'd finally spoken that way to her. I pulled a thin folder from my tote. Handed it to Alex. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the documents inside. The reversal. The bank records Warren compiled. All the proof laid bare in neat black print. Alex's lips parted like he might defend her. Then he read further. And something in his eyes dimmed. I think in that moment, he finally saw it all for what it was. Cassie snatched the folder from him, flipping through the pages faster and faster. Her breath started to come out in tiny, broken gasps. This is nothing. We were helping you. This is going to ruin everything. I let a small, almost tired smile slip. Maybe. But it means I still have something that's mine. And that matters more than your convenience. Alex ran a hand through his hair. The way he always did when he was 13 and got caught sneaking out. But there was no sheepish grin this time. Just a dawning horror. Mom, was this really all Cass? I didn't answer. Didn't have to. Truth sat heavy in the silence between us. Cassie's jaw set. Her eyes narrowed like she wanted to spit something cruel. Instead, she spun on her heel, storming back toward the car. Her sandals clacked hard on the driveway. Alex lingered. His shoulders sagged. He looked at me with an ache that almost cut through everything. Almost. I gave a small nod. Not forgiveness. Just finality. When he finally turned to follow her, I let out a slow breath. Watched them drive off, their taillights blinking at the corner. A few petals from the neighbor's tree drifted down, catching in the space where their car had been. You ever stand in the middle of your own life and realize the worst has already happened? That the heartbreak isn't in the confrontation but in knowing it had to come to this? I thought maybe I'd cry. But no tears came. Just a strange lightness. They thought my silence was surrender. But it was just patience. And now, standing there with the sun warming my shoulders, I felt something else unfurl inside me. Not victory. Not quite. But the first clean breath I'd taken in years. That evening, I sat by my living room window with a cup of mint tea, knees tucked under an old quilt Ruth had given me last Christmas. Outside, the street lamps glowed a gentle amber. The neighbors' kids chased each other through puddles from an afternoon rain, their laughter drifting up to my second-floor apartment like a song half-remembered. It was quiet in here. Not the heavy, haunted quiet that had filled my old house after Richard died. This was different. This was a calm that felt earned. On the coffee table lay the thick folder Warren had compiled. Neat rows of evidence, every small betrayal labeled and dated. I rested my hand on it for a moment. Not because I needed the reassurance. Because it reminded me of how far I'd come. Funny, isn't it? How you can live decades believing love means never saying no. Never pushing back. I thought if I kept being agreeable, kept writing checks and offering spare bedrooms and covering ugly truths with polite smiles, that somehow it would all balance out. Turns out, it doesn't. Turns out, love without boundaries is just a slow kind of erasure. The TV was on low, some home renovation show playing out the familiar dance of demo days and fresh paint. I barely watched it. Instead, my mind wandered through memories I hadn't touched in years. Alex at 5, running barefoot through the sprinkler. Cassie laughing in my kitchen the first Christmas she spent with us, cheeks flushed from too much mulled wine. Me, sitting on the porch steps with Richard long after the sun went down, our hands twined, talking about everything we'd still do someday. Someday is a slippery promise. It disappears if you're not careful. I closed my eyes for a beat. Felt the cushion dip beneath me, the faint scent of lavender from the candle I'd lit. You ever wonder if maybe we teach people exactly how to mistreat us? Not by what we say, but by what we keep forgiving. By how quickly we look away from warning signs, telling ourselves it's just a rough patch, just stress, just life. I did that. For years. Now here I was. Not richer. Not surrounded by family. But finally, fully myself. It's strange how loss carves out space inside you. Space that you can choose to fill with regret. Or with something better. Like truth. Or simple, blessed peace. My phone buzzed once. A text from Alex. Just 5 words. Can we please talk soon? I didn't answer. Not because I was cruel. Because I needed him to sit with the silence. To wonder, maybe for the first time, what my absence cost him. That was new for me. Letting someone else carry the weight of their choices. For so long, I'd been the one bending under it all. I took a slow sip of tea, feeling the warmth slip down, settling somewhere deep. The night stretched out ahead, full of small comforts. The soft hum of the fridge. The promise of fresh sheets when I finally crawled into bed. No battles waiting in the morning. Just me. And that was enough. Do you know what that kind of quiet feels like? The honest kind, not built on swallowing disappointments or smoothing over someone else's mess. It's priceless. I wouldn't trade it for all the crowded dinner tables or smiling holiday cards in the world. I hope, if you're still listening, that maybe you take a little piece of this with you. That you remember you don't have to keep proving your worth by how much you endure. Love that asks you to vanish isn't really love at all. If this story tugs at something inside you, if it feels uncomfortably close, I hope you'll tell me. Drop a comment. Or just a simple, I hear you. Because sometimes that's all we really need. To know we're not the only ones who woke up one day and decided to finally stop disappearing. Tomorrow, I might bake lemon bread. Or drive to the farmer's market and fill my little fridge with bright peppers and goat cheese. Maybe I'll call Ruth and let her pick some old movie we've both seen 10 times. That's the funny gift of surviving heartbreak. It gives you the freedom to dream small again. To find joy in tiny, ordinary moments. Without anyone siphoning them off. I leaned my head back, let my eyes drift shut. Listened to the soft patter of rain starting up again outside. It was all mine now. This peace. This hard-won, delicate life. And I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me again.